Well, how are you today? This is Pastor Dan. We're doing God Talk again today. And it is just my honor. I retired and I get a chance to preach everywhere, and I'm thankful. And if you're here watching and listening, I'm thankful. I've got two or three I'd like to do from the book of Psalms. I hope that it'll be a blessing to you. We talk about David and the Psalms. I've been reading the Bible through and just read through those 150 Psalms. They're so good. So let me start with the story. I was in Portland as a young pastor. We had some good years. We had Bill Walton for a while, and we got a world championship. And then we went down. And so now you're gonna have a high draft choice because you have a terrible team. And you have a choice to make. If you know basketball at all, number one was Hakeem Olajuwon. That's easy, from Houston. He's a great player, Hall of Fame player. Michael Jordan is in here. He hadn't played all 4 years in college. I forget if he did 2 or 3 years in college. Won a national championship, made a basket. He's a good player, but no one knew he would be what Michael Jordan is. And our team needed a tall player, and they had a choice between the 6'11" center and Michael Jordan. And they chose the 6'11". You always want height. Chicago gets Michael Jordan, 6'6". But he has something besides incredible jumping and great fundamentals and all the rest. Michael Jordan has a heart that no one else has. I've watched people discuss what Michael Jordan had. Isaiah Thomas and Magic Johnson. What sets Michael Jordan apart? His heart. He's got the eyes, he's got the jumping, he's got the moves, but unrelenting, game after game, night after night, heart. Just refused to lose. Famous game, against Utah, I think, where he was sick. They just had this Jordan revival here recently. Watched the series. And Jordan was sick, and they came onto the court. You practically had to carry him off every time there was a timeout. And he scores 39 points. A lot of us would say that was the greatest game he ever played. Scottie Pippen had to practically carry him off. 39. Got hard. And God says about David, he's a man after my own heart. You know the story. Saul is the king. God chose Saul. Saul is an anointed choice of God. Something happened inside the heart and mind of Saul. They're going to have a time where they're going to sacrifice. And Saul does not do what God has told him to do, what Samuel told him to do. And Samuel came to him and just said, this is it. God has rejected you and your family as the king. You got to find another king. God directs Samuel out to the house of Jesse. He said, I want to look at your sons. He has 7 sons. First one looks good. Oh, he looks like a king. He's sure, humanly, this is the one. And then the famous line, 1 Samuel 16, verse 7. Man looks on the outward appearance. God looks on the heart. We start a little series on Psalm. We start with this. God looks on the heart. Where does that go with you in your heart and soul? We're a very visual world. We take pictures on Instagram, send pictures everywhere, take selfies. People are famous actors and movie stars for how they look. Started off at last year, how many years ago now? Like this next week, April 1, 1994, 27 years ago. 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 4 months later, we're having our first school year on my watch. You want to make a good impression, all these kids come, we want to be their college church. So boy, we planned everything. We had choir, we had all this stuff, did the best I could to get a college student-oriented sermon. And we had a big meal in the cafeteria. I'm walking to the cafeteria. Lady came up to me. She said, Pastor, now I'm going to tell you something. There was a young man who came late to church today, maybe 11:45. He had long hair, just dressed in a T-shirt. I think he had rings, tattoos, something, whatever she told me. And she said somebody in the lobby, we don't know to this day who it was, said to him, young man, you really can't come into church dressed like that. You need to wait outside. That young man was there to meet his girlfriend who was singing in the choir, said to her, I will never go to the church again. She told the mother told me. I finally figured out who the boy was. Became my friend. I apologized. We wrote a letter to everybody in the church leadership because we don't know who did it. So we wrote a letter to everybody. Yes, we agree that the idea God is worthy of your very best. Yes, we agree with that. That's what I do. But God, we will take anybody dressed however they want to dress as long as they will come. Because God doesn't look on the outward appearance. God looks on the heart. Famous story. A bunch of Adventists were in Hawaii, including the pastor, youth group. So they're out swimming around, and all of a sudden the pastor came over to the boat and he said, don't go swim over there. There's a lady swimming there naked, doesn't have her swimming suit on. But don't worry, she's not part of our group. How do you know? She's wearing jewelry. Only an Adventist pastor would notice that. They call them boundary markers. Certain things you do and you wear and you have a certain look so that everybody knows you belong to this group. So the Muslims, of course, they wear the burqa. You just see their eyes. Or the shawl, the hijab. You know who they are. They stand out. Or the Jews with the side curls or the skull cap. You hear people come back from a plane trip and they said, I just saw this person, I just knew they were an Adventist. How did you know? Outside. God says, I know your heart. We were having some interesting drama at La Sierra University when I was the pastor years ago. And we were having a women's ordination and all this stuff. And the General Conference president said some things publicly about our school and about us. And I had some dialogue with him, and I finally emailed him. I said, why don't you come out here? Not everyone was happy that I did this. But I said, I want you to look beyond the surface and know our heart. Don't just go by a little symbol of something or another. Come talk to us. Meet with us. Know who we are. Know our heart. Don't just judge us by things you've heard. God finally says about David, he's a man after my own heart. How can he do that? David committed murder, adultery, polygamy. How could he be a man after my own heart? We go by behaviors. A friend of mine, we went to high school together in Singapore. His father is a leader in the church, mission president. Became a college pastor of a large churches in our country. They fired him. He's controversial a little, okay? But they finally figured out that he hadn't been paying tithe to his own church. I listened to sermons where he asked the church members to give, and he wasn't giving himself. They found out he was sending money to Habitat for Humanity, whatever, but not to his own church and to the conference. What happened in his heart? My friend. I was on a list later to go to that church. I said, I don't ever want to be part of a committee that's going to vote on my friend's membership. We had a story in my university where I was called to a meeting, and this kid had played on the tennis courts on Friday night. I don't know if he didn't see the sign or what. I don't remember that part of the story. All I know is they caught him, security found him, lights on, playing in an Adventist university on the tennis courts after sundown on Friday night. And his answer was, I want either the president, Dr. Larry Garrity, or Pastor Dan Smith, the senior pastor, to give me a Bible study showing me that it's wrong to play tennis on Friday night, on the Sabbath. So I said, well, Dr. Garrity, he's the president of the university. Start with him. A few weeks later, I'm on a committee to vote on this kid to be a student missionary, and they voted for him, and they brought him to my church for a dedication, to dedicate him to go be a student missionary for a year. The same kid who played tennis on Friday night. Great kid, great heart for God, wanted to go give his life for a year in student mission service, playing tennis on Friday night. How do you balance these heart things? But God says, I want a man after my own heart. He doesn't look on the outward, he looks at the heart. How's your heart today? If God lined us up like he lined up those 7 sons, where would you rank in the line of your heart? If God had a spiritual EKG to give you right now, how would your heart be? Maybe you've heard some of these things. This is kind of an Adventist thing now. You know that LLBN comes from an Adventist tradition. But one of the fun things is to tease yourself a little bit. So here are some of the things. You might be an Adventist if you ever looked for the angels outside a movie theater. Because we were told growing up that the angels stopped right at the door. You pronounce Adventist, Adventist. Many non-Adventists will say Adventist. But if you're in a church, you know we're Adventist. You still feel guilty if you take a shower on the Sabbath. That's how I grew up too. Comes from when people bathe for hours in a tub of melted snow. Not talking about a 2-minute shower. On Sabbath, you catch your telling your children, you can wade, but you can't swim. You got your sex education from your mother handing you a book by Harold Shryock. I buried Harold Shryock right here at Montecito. His daughter was in my church. Great, great, great man. But he wrote a couple simple books, and that's what we all grew up with. You know how to play rook. It's a card game, but you don't know how to play bridge or hearts or poker. You never played cards, but you played rook till 3 o'clock in the morning on Saturday night. You know 101 ways to prepare fried chicken. You go out for lunch after church, but you make sure you use your credit card so you don't actually pay for it on the Sabbath. You would never dare raise your hands in a worship service. You grew up knowing that smoking and drinking and cokes and dancing and meat eating were sins. But you never heard anything about anger, resentment, racism, sexism, or judgmentalism. You can often look at people and you know something. You know their church or religion. You can know if they're conservative or liberal in the church. Are they wearing? Are they looking? But you don't know their heart. We have no way of knowing. I had a battle with my church conference leaders one time because they were surreptitiously checking on employees paying tithe, and they were using my church books in order to know. I had a battle over that. So be careful. You judge people as good people or bad people, whether they can work for you or not, based on whether they pay a faithful tithe, okay? Be careful. What do you really know about their heart? You can't see inside to their heart. God says, I want to know your heart. People of my heart. How do you keep your heart warm and soft? Bill Hybels tells a story. As his church grew up to 12, 15, 20, and then 25,000. He's preaching one sermon on Wednesday and Thursday nights, another sermon 6 times on the weekend, Saturday night, all day Sunday. Every minute, sermon prep, sermon prep. You're working out, so what can I preach this week? I know something about this. I heard this story myself. As his life became faster and faster, he dropped everything that had given him joy before. He quit motorcycle riding, quit sailing, just work. Speaker around the world, writing articles, preaching. He said one day he's in a coffee shop, Starbucks, whatever, he's working on his message, looks at his watch, time to go, grabs his stuff, stuffs it in a bag, out the door, but there's a man in a wheelchair getting ready to leave right then. Slow, trying to push the door open. Hal doesn't actually say anything, but he's mad inside. Come on, dude, let's go. I got to get out. Places to go, things to do. He gets in the car and he looks at his heart. And he said, Bill, you used to have a big heart. You had a soft heart for the poor, soft heart for the disabled, soft heart for the marginalized people in the world. What happened to your heart, Bill? Had to go on a sabbatical. He renegotiated with his church. 7 weeks off in the summer, got a little cabin over on the other side of Lake Michigan. Got a full-time assistant just for him. Brought in team teachers so they would share the preaching. Got to get his heart back. Now, he's made mistakes later on, but he made a 40-plus year career out of it. He's done a lot of good. Got his heart back. Sunflower. Simon Wiesenthal was in the German camp, working in a hospital as a prisoner. They asked him one day to come up. There was a German up in the third floor. Walked in, 21 years old, covered with bandages. They left him in there. The young man says, I've been fighting on the Eastern Front. We've been killing Jews. He said, we light their houses on fire. And then when the family goes to the upper window and they get ready to jump to get away from the fire, we machine gun them when they jump. He says, I can't get their screams out of my mind. So I'm going to die, I think, today. I want a Jew to forgive me. And he puts his hand out asking for forgiveness. What would you have done? There's 2 levels in this story. What's happened to this boy? What happened to this whole culture? That you can do that to a group of people that have a religion or a culture different from yours, and you burn their houses and machine gun them, put them in camps, massacre 6 million of them. That's one heart issue. Church people, Christian people. But Simon Wiesenthal struggled with his heart because he did not forgive. He turned around and walked out the door, let that young man die unforgiven. Spent the rest of his life asking people, did I do the right thing? And the Sunflower, half the people that wrote, famous people. No, you have no right to be the one to forgive. They didn't do it to you. That's unforgivable. Other people said, you'll never be free in your heart unless you forgive. How's your heart? God wants a heart. How does your heart become cold and hard? You all know how that feels. When something that used to touch you doesn't touch you. some disaster around the world, and you can't feel it because we got compassion fatigue. We don't feel it in our heart anymore. You're sitting in church and you're worshiping, and you're not worshiping because your heart's cold. How's your heart? Yes, it's true that your heart reflects the rest of your life, your mind. The Bible says, love God with all your heart, soul, and your mind. How you think about God is going to affect your heart. Yes, it will. So it's important to think well, important to think right. I spent a lot of my time thinking about how to think correctly about God, because it affects your heart. Yes, it does. But eventually, the bottom line is the heart. I came out of school. I was a good student. I had a good GPA, graduated with some high honors. I have one of those robes now with the stripes. And I knew Greek, and I got an A in the Hebrew class. And I knew some big words. You ask me what Hayalagashikte or whatever that word is, I can tell you roughly what that means. Salvation history. And I can talk about transubstantiation. They would ask me as the young pastor, what is this apotelsmatic? How do you pronounce that? I knew. I was a young little theologian. And I came into my two little country churches ready to be the gift from God to these people. And I found out that none of that seemed to matter very much. Measuring my heart. How much did I love them? After 3 years, I was there 6. Never forget, I was sitting at a party and a lady came up to me, and I had been in their house a lot, visited her husband in jail many times. And she said, Pastor Dan, we weren't sure at the beginning. We were watching. But now we feel like you're one of us. Here I came from education and the citadels of learning and all of that, and I did well at that level. They wanted to know my heart. Was I one of them? One of my members died. Simple man. Made money, but was a very simple man. And I sat at New Year's Day party next to him. Hospital bed. For an hour, I just laughed and talked with him. I brought him into the church, he and his wife. 2 weeks later, not 2 weeks, the next day, daughter-in-law called me, Pastor Dan, he died. That's right, I baptized him 2 weeks before, sat all night with him the night before, and he died. These people and I still love each other 40 years later. They wanted to know a pastor who loved them. Pastor who had a heart. I read a story about the kid who had a Corvette. Dreamed and dreamed and dreamed of this red, fire red Corvette. He's at a ball game, and all of a sudden, in the middle of the ball game, it begins to hail down the sky. Everyone runs to a cover where they can get under a cover. He runs to his car, which he had parked at the end of the parking lot so no one could touch it. And he's lying on top of the car to keep the hailstones from hitting his precious car anymore. So, things, money, people who have hurt you, working too hard, all heart killers, and can take away your heart for God. And God says, where's your heart? How is your heart? We were in Thailand. First time I went back after many years, and we're in an orphanage. Been to the orphanage many times since then, and we've built buildings for them. But the first time, they had a little show for me and the pastor who was with me. These kids' parents have HIV. Some of the parents are still alive, others have died. But the parents cannot take care of the kid. They all were dying of HIV. And we take them into this orphanage. And they teach them to do these little songs. And they put on a program and they memorize Bible verses. You touch your heart. Nobody had any money when we walked out of there. Every time I've taken people there, there's no money left. So, what can we do to help you? Touches your heart. Can Jesus still touch your heart? Is it good news or is it bad news that God looks on the heart, my friend? The Bible says that stuff comes out of your heart. We can know who you are by your heart. Out of the mouth reflects what's in your heart, Jesus said. God said, look at the heart. Now, the good news, of course, is that you and I are not saved by the actions at all. We're saved by Jesus giving up his heart. Let his heart stop beating so that you and I could have salvation. But he says, I'll give you a new heart. I'll take out the heart of stone. I'll give you a heart of flesh. Ask Jesus to give us a heart. It's all about the heart. I'll give you 5 things here to end quickly. What does it mean in the book of Psalms in order to be a person after God's own heart? H-E-A-R-T. H is honor God's name. All the way through the Psalms, God has said, David is a man after God's own heart. He honors God's heart. You honor God's name. You take the name of God. In Revelation 14, you have the name of God on your forehead. You honor God's name. H. E is emotion. David is a man who had emotion for God. Might not have been perfect, but he had a heart for God. He danced because he could bring God's altar, God's ark back to the temple. Emotion. A is for anything. People who have a heart for God do anything for God. That's what he said about David. He's a man after my own heart. He'll do anything I ask him to do. The centurion said, you don't have to go. Just say the word. We'll do anything. Seek ye first the kingdom of God. R is repent. David sinned really bad, but he repented just as big. My grandfather is a saint of God, but he made a little mistake one time with me. Said something he shouldn't have said. Wrote me a note. I'm so sorry. Big heart. That's the R. T is temple. David wants to honor God. He built him a temple for God to come and worship God. How's your heart? How's your heart? If I can just say to you, it's a heart thing with God. The whole war that's going on, read John Eldridge, Wild at Heart. The battle is over the heart. It comes out of your heart. Guard your heart. Protect your heart. Let Jesus give you a new heart. This is God Talk. Hope you'll be with us again next week. We'll do it again.